The first note hadn't even faded when the young woman in the hospital bed began to cry. It wasn't the quiet kind of crying people tried to hide. It was the kind that came from years of carrying invisible pain, the kind that escaped before pride could stop it. Every conversation in the rehabilitation wing seemed to pause for a heartbeat as the melody drifted through the sunlit hallway. Even the nurses stopped walking. Then, as I lifted my hands from the piano keys, I heard a trembling voice behind me whisper words that would change far more than one life. A mother stood there with tears filling her tired eyes, holding onto the back of a wheelchair as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. She looked at me and quietly said that she wanted to learn too. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can transform lives, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel to join our community for more heartfelt stories. Every Tuesday morning, Rowan Mercer volunteered at St. Aldan Rehabilitation Hospital. It wasn't because he needed community service hours or recognition. Years earlier, music had carried him through the grief of losing his younger sister after a long illness. When the world had become unbearably quiet, the piano had given his broken heart somewhere to speak. Ever since then, he had promised himself that if music could save even one person from drowning in loneliness, he would keep playing for as long as his hands allowed. The hospital lobby was flooded with warm daylight that poured through enormous glass windows. Children laughed in one corner while therapists guided patients through difficult exercises. Families carried flowers, balloons, and hopeful smiles that hid sleepless nights. Near the center stood an old polished piano donated decades before by a grateful family. It wasn't perfect. Several keys had tiny scratches, and its finish had faded with age, but its sound remained beautifully honest. That morning Rowan noticed someone he had never seen before. A young woman sat near the rehabilitation area, staring through the windows without really seeing anything outside. Her name, according to the nurse, was Maren Whitlock. She had survived a devastating car accident 6 months earlier. The injuries to her legs required months of therapy, but the physical wounds were only part of the battle. She had once been a dance instructor whose entire identity revolved around movement. Losing confidence in her body had left scars no surgery could repair. Maren rarely smiled. She politely thanked nurses but avoided conversations. She skipped group activities whenever possible and spent hours looking at photographs on her phone of performances she believed would forever remain in the past. Her mother, Celeste, visited every single day, arriving with homemade soup, fresh fruit, and unwavering determination. Yet even her endless encouragement seemed unable to reach the place where her daughter's hope had disappeared. Rowan didn't know any of that when he sat down at the piano. He simply played the piece his sister had loved most, one filled with gentle crescendos that sounded like sunlight slowly breaking through clouds after endless rain. As the music filled the lobby, people naturally gathered nearby. Some closed their eyes. Others smiled quietly. Rowan noticed Maren will herself closer almost without realizing she was doing it. Her eyes remained fixed on his hands as if every note carried a memory she had forgotten she still possessed. When the final chord settled into silence, she quietly admitted that she had once dreamed of learning piano but always believed there would be time later. Later had vanished the day of the accident. They spoke every Tuesday after that. Rowan never treated Maren like someone who needed pity. Instead, he spoke to her about ordinary things. Favorite books. Ridiculous childhood stories. Coffee that tasted terrible. Rainy afternoons. Music that reminded people they were still alive. Little by little, laughter returned to her conversations. One bright afternoon, Rowan brought a small portable keyboard into the therapy room. He placed it in front of Maren and encouraged her to press just one key. She hesitated. Her hands shook. The single note echoed softly. Then another. And another. For the first time in months, her expression changed. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was possibility. Day after day, those simple notes became melodies. Her fingers stumbled, repeated mistakes, and slowly improved. Therapists noticed she participated more actively in physical exercises afterward. Nurses noticed she smiled during meals. Other patients gathered around whenever she practiced because her determination inspired them as much as the music itself. Still, Rowan couldn't ignore someone else watching from a distance. Celeste never missed a lesson. She remained quietly near the doorway, pretending to read magazines while carefully observing every movement. Sometimes she copied finger positions on her own knee without realizing anyone could see. One sunny afternoon, after Maren finished practicing a simple song from memory, she wheeled herself toward therapy while Rowan packed away the keyboard. That was when Celeste approached. Her hands trembled slightly. Deep lines of exhaustion crossed her face. She confessed that she had never learned an instrument because life had always demanded something more urgent. Working 2 jobs. Raising her daughter alone after her husband walked away decades earlier. Paying bills. Missing dreams one responsibility at a time. She admitted something else. Watching her daughter learn again reminded her that perhaps she had stopped believing she deserved to begin anything herself. Then came the quiet question that Rowan would never forget. Could he teach her too? He smiled before answering. The following week, 2 folding chairs stood beside the keyboard instead of one. Maren laughed whenever her mother confused left and right hands. Celeste laughed at herself even harder. Soon their lessons became the brightest part of every Tuesday. Patients passing through rehabilitation slowed down simply to watch the unlikely pair learning together. An elderly stroke survivor began singing softly whenever they practiced. A young boy receiving chemotherapy clapped after every finished piece regardless of how many mistakes they made. The little corner of the hospital slowly transformed into something larger than music. It became hope with piano keys. One afternoon, Rowan arrived to find Maren unusually quiet again. She had attended a medical consultation earlier that morning. Progress had slowed. Recovery would take much longer than anyone expected. The disappointment hit her like another accident. She stared silently at the keyboard without touching it. Instead of encouraging practice, Rowan simply sat beside her. Sometimes healing didn't require advice. Sometimes it required someone willing to stay through silence. After several minutes, Celeste gently placed her own uncertain hands on the keys. She began playing the tiny melody she had struggled with for weeks. She missed several notes. Her rhythm wandered. Yet she continued anyway. Maren looked at her mother with tears filling her eyes. For years she had believed strength meant never appearing weak. Now she watched the strongest woman she knew willingly make mistakes in front of everyone without shame. Something inside her shifted. She reached toward the keyboard and quietly joined in. The melody wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. Every imperfect note carried courage. Word about the Tuesday music session spread throughout the hospital. Doctors adjusted lunch breaks to listen. Volunteers rearranged schedules. Families planned visits around performances that weren't really performances at all. One morning the hospital director asked Rowan if they would consider organizing a daytime recital for patients and visitors. Everyone agreed. Preparation became its own form of therapy. Maren practiced with determination she hadn't shown since before the accident. Celeste practiced even harder, determined not to embarrass herself. The recital took place in the bright rehabilitation atrium surrounded by flowering plants and huge windows overflowing with sunshine. Wheelchairs formed neat rows. Children sat cross-legged on the floor. Doctors leaned against walls. Nurses filled every remaining space. No one expected perfection. They came to witness courage. When Maren and Celeste sat beside each other at the piano, their hands briefly found one another before reaching for the keys. The first few notes carried understandable nervousness. Then confidence arrived. The melody blossomed. Mother and daughter weren't simply playing music. They were telling the story of fear transformed into hope. By the final chord, tears filled countless eyes. Even Rowan struggled to blink away emotion. The loudest applause came not because the performance had been flawless, but because every person listening understood how much invisible pain had been overcome to reach those few beautiful minutes. Several weeks later, Maren took her first independent steps across the therapy room using only a cane. They were slow, uneven, painful. But they were hers. She laughed through happy tears while therapists applauded. Celeste cried openly without embarrassment. Rowan stood quietly in the background, grateful simply to witness the moment. Months passed. Maren eventually left the hospital, continuing outpatient therapy while volunteering every Tuesday beside Rowan. Instead of receiving encouragement, she offered it. New patients who believed life had ended after illness or injury found themselves speaking with someone who truly understood despair. Celeste kept learning piano too. She often joked that retirement had finally become the beginning of childhood. Together they organized free beginner music afternoons for families waiting through long medical treatments. Parents, grandparents, children, and patients all gathered around keyboards with no pressure to become experts. The goal was never perfection. The goal was connection. One sunny afternoon, Rowan looked around the familiar lobby. The old piano remained scratched. The sunlight still poured through the glass. The laughter sounded brighter than ever. He realized something remarkable. Years earlier he had believed he was volunteering to give comfort. Instead, he had received far more than he had ever offered. He had witnessed strangers becoming family. He had watched hopelessness become determination. He had learned that healing sometimes begins not with medicine, but with one person choosing to share a gift without expecting anything in return. Before this story comes to an end, we'd love to hear from you. Please leave a meaningful comment telling us about a moment when kindness, encouragement, or a second chance changed someone's life, or your own. Your words might become the hope another reader needs today. As Rowan played one final gentle melody that afternoon, Maren stood beside her mother, smiling with quiet confidence neither of them believed possible only months earlier. Their journey had never been about mastering the piano. It had been about discovering that broken dreams can become beautiful beginnings when someone is willing to sit beside us, believe in us, and patiently teach us that life still has songs left to play. The hospital never forgot the sound of those Tuesdays, because every note reminded everyone who listened that hope is rarely loud. Sometimes it arrives as softly as a piano played in the middle of an ordinary day, finding hearts that had almost forgotten how to believe again. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. And always remember that the smallest act of kindness, offered at exactly the right moment, can become the melody that changes someone's life forever.